Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm here to teach you how to play my game, From Beneath. From Beneath is a 1 to 4 player worker placement and tile laying game in which players design their own dungeons and protect it from invaders. The game takes place over 3 seasons. In each season, players will have 3 to 4 action rounds, called months, to build a dungeon in preparation for the invasion and upkeep. During the invasion, players will explore dungeons that other players created, destroying rooms and gaining loot. During upkeep, players will decide how to use the loot and also pay 1 food per worker that they have hired. After the 3rd season, the game ends, and players count points based upon how many rooms they have built and protected to determine the winner. Now I will show the setup for a 3 and 4 player game. The setup for the 1 and 2 player game has a few small differences which can be found at the back of the rulebook. Give each player a player board. For the first game, I recommend that players use the basic dungeon board. More experienced players can use the temples on the opposite side of each board. Next, give each player the starting resources and items depicted in the top left corner of the board. For the basic dungeon, that is 6 red minions, 1 wood, 1 stone, 3 food, 2 dull gear, 1 chest, and 2 altars. Give each player a yellow meeple to indicate their invader, 2 markers to place on their upgrade tracks, and 8 tunnels to place near their tunneling action space. Have each player roll a die to determine the starting player and give this player the starting player token. Turns will progress in clockwise order from this player. Choose 1 invader card per player in the game and place them where everyone can see. For the first game, I recommend using the basic invaders, the mage, brute, knight, and thief. In reverse player order, players choose the invader they will control for the rest of the game. This will also be the invader entering that player's dungeon during the first invasion. Next, place the action and resource boards in the center of the table with resources and worker meeples nearby. Place room tiles in equally sized stacks, randomly sorted, in their respective locations on the action board. Place stacks of chests, bomb chests, and torches in their locations. Then shuffle and place dull gear and gold gear decks on their respective locations. Place the worker ability, -2 points, 5x resources, and pathing tokens next to the play area. Place the month marker on month 0 for the first season. Place the season marker over season 2 to cover up the entire column where flame accumulates. This shows that it is season 1. Now I will teach you how to fill the resource board with the resources for the start of the game. After, I will give an example of how to fill the resource board after a typical month of play. The resource board has 2 key areas, the resource paddocks and the resource tables. When filling the resource board each month, we only need to focus on the resource paddocks. To fill the resource board, you must first look at the fill numbers at the bottom and top of the board. This will show how many resources will come out at the start of each month. Always start by filling according to the bottom resource fill number first, and start in the first empty paddock closest to the fill number. Then continue by placing 1 resource in each paddock in the direction of the arrow. If you reach the last paddock on the opposite side, wrap around and start at the bottommost paddock until all resources indicated by the number have been placed. Then do the same for the top fill number, placing it in the first paddock since no paddocks are empty. Continue in this manner for stone, food, and gold. This is what the resources should look like at the start of the game. Now I will teach you how to fill the resource board after a typical month of play. These are the resources left over after the action phase of the last month. Starting with wood, we need to start with the first empty paddock, here, and add 4 wood. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then the top fill number, which is just 1. Stone will fill similarly as in the last month, 1, 2, 3, and then 1. Stone is really starting to pile up in this space since no one took it last month. Now food, since all paddocks are full, we start filling normally with the paddock closest to the fill number, 1, 2, and then 1. And lastly, gold, 1 here, and for the top fill number, the closest empty paddock is on the other side of the board, so we place 1 here. Now that the game is set up, we are ready to start the action phase. During the action phase, players will take turns placing 1 to 4 workers on the action spaces on the resource board, action board, and the player's dungeon board. In addition, players can take a few anytime actions detailed on the dungeon board, which only cost resources and can be taken at any time without ending the player's turn. There are two types of action spaces. The first is the circular solid border action space. These spaces require the number or type of workers indicated next to the action space. Notice that certain types of workers get different benefits on different action spaces. Green builders get bonuses on the top green portion of the board, while blue tinkers get bonuses on the bottom blue portion of the board. When players place workers on these action spaces, they conduct the action and it ends their turn. No player can use this space for the rest of the month. The second type is the rectangular dotted border action spaces. Players can place any numbers of workers here. These spaces do not end the player's turn, allowing them to continue by placing workers elsewhere if desired. These spaces can be used again even if workers have already been placed there. Many players' first turn of the month will be gathering resources. Players do so by placing 1 to 4 workers on the action spaces on the resource board. For each worker they place, they collect resources from that many paddocks or tables in front of their workers. 1 worker collects all resources from the first paddock, 2 workers collect all resources from the first 2 paddocks, 3 from the first 2 paddocks and table, and 4 from all paddocks and all tables in front of them. The worker indicator on the side of the resource board shows how many workers are required to access each row. As these are circular solid action spaces, they cannot be used again. If a player decides to place fewer workers than necessary to collect all resources, they are blocking other players from gaining resources in that column for the rest of the month. In 3 to 4 player games, the notice board on the action board also allows players to gather resources by placing the indicated amount of workers to gain the indicated resources. The notice board also provides a way for players to become the next starting player out of the typical turn order. But players cannot use this space if they are already the starting player. Most action spaces on the action board allow players to build rooms. Players do so by placing the required workers on the action space and then paying the indicated resources at the top of the room tile. Players can also choose to substitute 1 gold for 1 wood or 1 stone when paying for a room. Players can use either of the 2 action spaces to build any of the rooms available. The different room types are as follows. Dorms allow players to gain additional workers for the rest of the game. The worker arrives at the start of the next month. There are red minions, which are numerous and versatile, but require more food, green builders, which are good at building, and blue tinkers, which are good at offense and defense. Basic rooms are either production rooms that allow players to gain the indicated resource at the start of each month, or recovery rooms that allow players to recover battling workers injured during the invasion. Defensive rooms reduce the invader's attributes by the amount indicated on the tile. Some only work for 1 invasion and must be repaired. Others have a shield, meaning they are not destroyed when the invader enters the room during the invasion. Hybrid rooms are a combination of the previous 3 types of rooms. Since they are bigger, they require more workers and more resources to build, but they are worth double the points at the end of the game. Altars allow players to earn points at the end of the game. The altar action space allows players to build one of the altars available on the board or one of the altars they received at the game start. In a 3 to 4 player game, players can also use the hybrid room action spaces to build an altar they received at the game start. Once players build rooms, they must place them in their dungeon immediately. The placement rules are as follows. Rooms must be placed in the entry area or an area already lit by a torch. Rooms must be orthogonally adjacent to an existing room or tunnel. Rooms must always have an unobstructed path back to the dungeon entrance. Players must also be mindful of the resource icons they cover up when placing rooms. The majority of the icons indicate what resources are placed on the resource tables on the resource board. Once covering up these icons with a room, the player must take the indicated resources from the general supply and place them on the lowest number empty resource table on the resource board. These resources will be available for other players to gather. If the player covers an obtain resource icon, the player immediately receives those resources. Once a player places a room or tunnel in their dungeon, it cannot be moved. However, on a later turn, players can decide to replace them by building over them. When doing so, players place the rooms and tunnels that they built over onto the tables on the resource board for other players to build at no cost. Other players simply gather these rooms as if they were resources on the resource board. And then, when these players place these rooms in their dungeon, they obtain the resources from any resource icons they covered instead of them going to the resource board. Discarded Blueprints has two action spaces, Fill and Build. Fill allows players to cycle through unwanted rooms on the action board. When a player places one worker here, they can cover 3 spaces in this area, or 5 spaces if they place a builder. Players must fill these spaces in numerical order, but players can arrange the tiles freely in order that they fit properly. Players then obtain resources for any icons they cover. The Build action space allows players to build rooms in this area at a discount indicated to the left of the row that the tile is in. If the tile spans 2 rows, the player receives 2 discounts. If the room does not contain the indicated resource, players can choose a discounted resource from any row above. Chests are not rooms in the dungeon, but are rather placed on top of rooms, protecting them from destruction during the invasion. Building a chest also allows the player to gain a gear card, or a gold gear card if the player pays 1 extra gold. Gear must be placed inside the chest during the invasion to protect the room. Bomb chests function in the same way as chests, but also reduce the invader's HP by 1. Torches unlock more areas in the dungeon for the player to build. When building a torch, players immediately place it on any of their 4 torch holders on their dungeon board. This unlocks the color-coded area in their dungeon. To build in the bottommost row of the dungeon, players must have all 4 torches built. Players can place as many workers as they want to gain dull gear or gold gear to place inside their chests during the invasion. Notice that gold gear either requires players to pay 1 gold or use a blue tinker worker to gain. Gear can also be traded in the trading hall for the loot depicted at the bottom of the gear card. The trading hall allows players to trade resources. Minions and builders get 2 trades, while tinkers get 3 trades. Each box in the trading hall represents 1 trade. The dungeon board also provides action spaces. Tunneling allows players to construct 2 tunnels in their dungeon. Builders can construct 3 tunnels and place a blockade for free. Pathing allows players to remove blockades previously placed. Anytime actions are shown on the right side of the dungeon board. These can be performed at any time by paying the indicated resources and do not end the player's turn. These actions are upgrade defenses, increasing the HP reductions by rooms, bomb chests, and minions, or increasing move reduction by rooms, tinkers, and builders. Place a blockade in a tunnel only using 1 stone to obstruct the invader's path and protect rooms. Blockades can only be removed through the pathing action. Barricades are similar to blockades but cost 1 wood and can be placed in rooms only. However, barricades only last 1 invasion. Players can also pay 1 wood and 1 stone to repair 1 room destroyed during the invasion. Lastly, players can pay 1 food to recover a worker that was injured in a previous invasion. The action phase ends when all players have placed all their workers. Then the players start the next month by moving the month marker 1 month to the right, passing the starting player token clockwise, gathering income from their production rooms, and refilling the resource board, and then retrieving their workers. Since players share the same color workers, they need to refer to their starting workers in any built dorms to ensure they collect the correct number of workers. Then players repeat this process until the month marker reaches the season marker, at which point the season ends and the invasion and upkeep begin. The end of season triggers the invasion, in which invaders will enter each dungeon. The goal of the defender is to reduce one of the invader's attributes, HP or move, to 0. There are 2 win conditions detailed on the invader card. The primary win, which earns the defender a worker ability and 1 reward, and the secondary win, which just earns the defender the reward. If the invader enters all the rooms in the dungeon without either attribute reducing to 0, the defender fails and receives nothing. The goal of the invader is to collect gear from chests or destroy rooms. Any rooms destroyed by the invader will lose its benefits until the owner can repair it during the action phase of the next month. For production rooms, this means the player will not receive that resource at the beginning of the month. And for dorms, the player will not be able to use that worker until the month after the room is repaired. At the end of the first season, players defend against the invader that they control. In the second season, the invader travels to the next player in clockwise order, and in the third season, to the second player in clockwise order. Players prepare for the invasion by first retrieving all their workers from action spaces. Players can use these workers to defend against the invader. However, any workers that battle the invader will be injured during the next month of the season unless the player has a recovery room that can heal the workers. Luckily, the basic dungeon comes with one recovery room. Any workers that are not used to defend are placed aside and will not be injured. In addition to placing workers, players can place chests to protect rooms in their dungeon. Chests can only be placed in rooms, not tunnels, and each room can only have one chest. In order to protect the room, the chest needs to have gear inside. Players signify the gear in their chest by placing a pile of gear cards face down next to their dungeon board. When an invader enters a room with a chest, the player controlling the invader draws one card from the top of this pile. Since the chest had gear in it, the room is protected from destruction. Also, for each gear collected by the invader, the defender of the dungeon receives 1 gold. If an invader enters a room with a chest and there are no more gear left in the pile, the invader destroys the room instead. If there is any gear left in the pile after the invader is ousted, the defender keeps the remaining gear to be used during upkeep. Players control the invader they choose at the start of the game. Invaders always start at the dungeon entrance and move orthogonally across the room and tunnel tiles. Invaders cannot exit the room through the door that they entered, unless all other exits are blocked, nor can they enter an empty space on the dungeon board. When an invader enters the room, it is resolved in the following order. If the room is not protected by a chest or shield, the room is destroyed. If there is a chest, the invader draws a gear card and the chest owner receives 1 gold. The invader's move is reduced by 1 for small rooms and tunnels, and 2 move for large rooms. Apply defensive room effects. Apply worker battle effects. If neither attribute is reduced to 0, the invader can continue its movement to another room. Or, some invaders can perform their ability before they move, provided that they have the attributes left to do so. If an invader enters a room it has already been in, none of the effects trigger again. No attributes are reduced, rather the invader continues to the next room as if nothing happened. If players are having trouble remembering which rooms the invader has entered, they can use the pathing tokens. Once one of the invader's attributes are reduced to 0, the invasion ends immediately and the defender receives any rewards. During upkeep, players decide what to do with the gear they attain during the invasion. Players can either decide to use the cards, gaining the loot at the bottom, and equipping the gear to their invaders. Players can also decide to trade 2 dull gear for 1 gold gear, drawn from the top of the gold gear deck. If they decide to equip this gold gear, they get the loot at the bottom of the gold gear card. They do not receive the loot for the traded dull gear. Or players can choose to store the cards by tucking them under the loot storage portion of their dungeon board to earn points at the end of the game. Players can use their recovery rooms to recover any workers that battled the invader. Any workers that are not recovered will be unusable during the next action phase, at which point players can use 1 food to recover them, and they will start work again during the next month. Lastly, players must pay 1 food per worker they control, even for injured workers or workers in destroyed dorms. If they cannot, they receive 1 -2 points token for each unfed worker. After upkeep, push the season marker to reveal the next season and move the month marker to month 1, then resume the monthly cycle. After the 3rd invasion and upkeep, the game ends and players count points to determine the winner. Players receive points in the following manner: half a point per room tile in the dungeon entry, including the starting room, 1 point per room tile in the deep dungeon, 2 points per room tile in the deeper dungeon, and 3 points per room tile in the deepest dungeon. Tunnels do not earn points. 1 point per ruby, 1 point per dull gear, and 2 points per gold gear in the loot storage, and any points awarded from altars. Players receive negative points for any -2 points tokens, and -2 points for any injured workers at the game end. Thanks again for watching the How to Play video for From Beneath. I hope you enjoy playing.